Nothing better than a Republican catfight. This time, in one corner, we obviously have Donald Trump. We have Donald Trump almost every time because it's a catfight. He is Donald J. Troll, the king of the trolls, and he was trolling Bob Corker for reasons I'm going to explain. And in the other corner, Senator Corker from Tennessee, diehard conservative Republican. So this fight is both interesting on its face because you've got two Republicans going against each other, but also the devastating comments by Corker give you an excellent insight into what is actually going on in the White House. So how did it get started in the first place? Well, we go to the New York Times for that explanation. After a report last week, they report that Mr. Tillerson had once referred to Mr. Trump as a moron. Mr. Corker told reporters that Mr. Tillerson was one of three officials helping to separate our country from chaos. That's a quote, separate our country from chaos. Those remarks were repeated on Fox News Sunday, which may have prompted Mr. Trump's outburst. Okay, that is fair speculation. I will add, of course it did. He saw it on Fox. He's like, how could Corker possibly say that these are the guys keeping me from chaos? Otherwise, I couldn't do it on my own. And of course, Rex Tillerson's the Secretary of State that he had issues with last week. So Trump decides he's gonna start a war with Bob Corker. Genius idea, that'll help you get votes in the Senate. So he tweets out, Senator Bob Corker, quote, begged me to endorse him for re-election in Tennessee. I said no. That's also in quotes and capitalized because he's a child. And he dropped out, said he could not win without my endorsement. He also wanted to be Secretary of State. I said, again, capitalized and in quotes, no thanks. He's also largely responsible for the horrendous Iran deal. Hence, I would fully expect Corker to be a negative voice and stand in the way of great agenda. Didn't have the guts to run. Okay. Look, if we weren't used to it, a president sending out a tweet like that about someone in his own party would be so mental that that's all that anybody would ever talk about. If these tweets were from President Obama about a Democratic senator, it would have been the largest controversy of his entire 8-year administration. By far. If he was like, Schumer's a baby, I wouldn't endorse him, so he had to run and he wouldn't do it anymore. Didn't have the guts. People would be like, what? What in the world did you just say? But we're used to the president being a lunatic, so we're like, oh yeah, of course he's attacking one of his own colleagues, a fellow Republican, and in vicious ways. And is it true? Everybody knows it's not true. So the New York Times asked Corker about it. Corker says, this is his version. When I told him that just wasn't in the cards about running for re-election, he said, if you run, I'll endorse you. I said, Mr. President, it's just not in the cards. I've already made a decision. So then we began talking about other candidates that were running. Now look, I'm not one to believe any politician, let alone a Republican politician. So it's not like I look at Bob Corker and I think like the rest of the media does, like, oh, that's an honorable, esteemed gentleman from Tennessee. He must be telling the truth. No, I have a great deal of skepticism, and he might be coloring it to his advantage a little bit too. But given the track record of the pathological lies of Donald Trump, who do you think is more likely to be telling the truth? Okay, I'm gonna vote with Corker on this one. So we go forward, he says, I don't know why the president tweets out the things that are not true. You know he does it, everyone knows he does it, but he does. So now he's talking to the New York Times in response to those tweets from the president over the weekend. But he's not done. So after he talks to the Times, and there's some really powerful quotes I'm gonna get to in a second on that, he then goes back online and get a load of this. I want to talk about it. Wow. Senator Corker tweets, it's a shame the White House has become an adult daycare center. Someone obviously missed their shift this morning. Damn. Drums. Okay, drama in the Republican circles. That basically Bob Corker say, I'm not running for re-election anyway. What are you gonna do to me? Have at it, Hoss. Okay, you wanna do mean tweets? I can do mean tweets. Let's go to war here. And they're about to. So of course Trump, he's like, what? Somebody tweeted against me? Goes back on the tweeter machine and writes, Bob Corker gave us the Iran deal and that's about it. We needed healthcare, we needed tax cuts / reform. We need people that can get the job done. Now that's a reference to the Iran negotiations. Bob Corker, of course, voted against the Iran deal. Why? Because he's a Republican and he's absolutely wrong about that deal. But he allowed a vote in that case, which pissed off conservatives. They're like, you should never allow a vote under Obama. How dare you? And now we don't have war. Thanks a lot, Bob Corker, even though he actually voted against the deal and would have been perfectly happy with a war apparently. But not good enough. Someone fed that memo to Donald Trump because there's no way in the world he knew the details of that. And he comes out and goes, oh, he gave us the Iran deal. I never liked that guy in the first place. Really? You were meeting with him 2 weeks ago. You were happy to accept his support and praise during the campaign. And by the way, Bob Corker, thank you for coming to the party. You're a little bit late. I guess we'll take it. But we also remember how much you supported Donald Trump as he was running for president. Anyway, now let's go to the devastating quotes. Corker, talking to the New York Times, said, President Trump was treating this office like, quote, a reality show with reckless threats towards other countries that could set the nation, quote, on the path to World War III. A Republican senator saying a Republican president could set us on the path to World War III because of how reckless he is and how he's treating the White House basically as a joke. Wow. This would have been by far the biggest controversy under Obama. They would have had hearing after hearing after hearing. Oh my God, you've got a Democratic senator saying that the Democratic president is going to bring us to World War III. What does he know that we don't know? We need 1,000 hearings on this. Okay, this will be like any other day. Oh yeah, of course. But this is amazing stuff, guys. Don't get used to how insane this is. So he went on to explain, in an extraordinary, New York Times reports, in an extraordinary rebuke of a president of his own party, Mr. Corker said he was alarmed about a president who acts, quote, like he's doing the Apprentice or something, which of course is true. I think he does think that. By the way, also why he probably fires one person a week. He still thinks he's on the Apprentice. You're fired. Okay, how did I do in the ratings? You idiot, you're in the White House, that's a different job. Okay, he goes on to say, Corker does, he concerns me. He would have to concern anyone who cares about our nation. Look, that is the 7th most amazing and damaging quote from these series of interviews and tweets. But I want you to think about that. A Republican senator saying he would have to concern anyone who cares about our nation. If you're a Republican out there, what you don't know is what the people in power do know. They think that he is mentally unfit to run the presidency, that he's a danger to the whole world. That's what Bob Corker is telling you because he's not running for re-election. He has more. He says, I know for a fact that every single day at the White House, it's a situation of trying to contain him. That's why he made the reference to the adult daycare, because Donald Trump's a child, and every day they have to say, please, Mr. President, you're such an idiot, don't do that. You're gonna start something that is going to have devastating consequences. Of course, they don't say it in that language because all he cares about is ego. They have to say, Mr. President, you are so, so wonderful and that tweet was fantastic, but if you could just stop with the fantastic tweets because it might start a fantastic World War III. Okay, so more. Corker says, as long as there are people like that around, referring to John Kelly and Tillerson and Mattis, he says, who are able to talk him down when he gets spun up, calm him down and continue to work with him before a decision gets made, I think we'll be fine. So he's saying if those guys leave, watch out, because then the child will have no one to take care of him, and God knows what buttons he'll press. He says, I don't think he appreciates that when the president of the United States speaks and says the things that he does, the impact that it has around the world, especially in the region that he's addressing. And so yeah, it's concerning to me. So when he threatens complete annihilation of North Korea, and says that, hey, ignore our diplomats like Rex Tillerson, the Secretary of State, that obviously has devastating consequences because that means we cannot solve it through diplomacy. You just told them to ignore our top diplomat. What's the only other option left? A war. And as Bob Corker, deeply conservative Republican, is telling you, is that would be World War III. Don't do it. Watch out for the man-child in office. More, he says a lot of people think that there is some kind of good cop, bad cop act underway, but that's just not true. That's another really important one. I've been saying this from day one. You think he is doing some sort of three-dimensional chess? He wouldn't understand two-dimensional chess if you explained it to him for hours. He'd be like, what do I tweet about this? I don't understand. He can barely understand the concept of checkers. So there's no, Tillerson's saying this and I'm doing this and it's strategy. Every once in a while, certainly Republicans do it, but people on TV too, they'll be like, well, he won the presidency. He ran against Hillary Clinton. Anyway, he won the presidency, maybe he has some deep strategy. There's no strategy. It's just an idiot sitting in his office and watching Fox News and tweeting. That's it, that's the whole explanation. Now it's not just me saying it, it's one of the most respected Republicans in the country saying it. Okay, he says, I know he has hurt in several instances, he's hurt us as it relates to negotiations that were underway by tweeting things out, whether it's North Korea, Iran, or other foreign relations. He goes on and say, look, except for a few people, the vast majority of our caucus understands what we're dealing with here. So he's telling you something that we've been telling you, but you didn't believe it. Or some of you, of course, believe it. By the way, let's be clear. 2/3 of the country can't stand Donald Trump. Everybody says, well, I mean, look, he must be popular. No, he's polling at about 35%. That's it. That is not popular. That is deeply unpopular. He had the distinction of beating the single most unpopular candidate we've ever had. And he didn't even beat her in the popular vote. There is no magic. He just figured out to be populist, and the Democratic Party put out an elitist candidate. That's it. The 35% is real. That means people don't like him. Only about 1/3 of the country supports him. There's no magic here, okay? And the entire Republican caucus, according to one of their own, knows what a moron the president is, how dangerous the president is. They're just keeping it from you. Finally, he says, of course they understand the volatility that we're dealing with and the tremendous amount of work that it takes by people around him to keep him in the middle of the road. By that, he doesn't mean the middle of the road politically. Bob Corker and the Republican caucus is deeply right-wing. They're not concerned about Trump's policies being too moderate. Sometimes he's to the right of them, sometimes he's to the left of them. That's not what the issue here is. They're worried that he's gonna drive off the road. He doesn't know what he's doing. And this is Bob Corker letting the whole country know, we know, the Republican senators, the Republican caucus, we know that we have a madman in office. Well, Senator Corker, if you know, you have a deep responsibility to act. It's not like you can't do anything and you're not retired yet. You're still a United States Senator. And if your whole caucus knows, well, get together with the Democrats and do something about it. Because starting World War III is no light thing and shouldn't involve politics. We do have a dangerous lunatic in the White House. He is a buffoon, he has no idea what he's doing. He's a danger to the country and to the world. And now you've admitted that you know that. So the very next step should obviously be to do something about it. Help us build independent media together. Come join us, tytnetwork.com/join.